Here comes the snow. The official melting season has begun, especially as we're starting to see those warming temperatures. I'm ABC 10 Chief Meteorologist Monica Woods here in Northern California, right out of Sacramento. Now, we've got our ridge of high pressure building in, and that is going to result in sinking, warming air. Nothing too extreme yet. This is a pretty typical metering of that snow melt coming down the hill. It's just that we've had some incredible snow this season. Our snowmelt impacts over the weekend really start to ramp up deep into our Saturday all the way through Monday afternoon with a flood watch in effect. Creeks and streams are going to be running high and fast, primarily for the high country. Flooding on low water crossings is possible, so all the recreation happening in the Sierra this time of year needs to be carefully monitored, as well as the extremely cold water. We've still got overnight lows in the 30s for the Sierra. Beautiful snowpack, though. They're still skiing at Palisades Tahoe. In fact, they're saying all the way through July 4th with epic numbers for snowpack there. And you can see this is just one of those places you look right out over the lake. I mean, oh my goodness, what a beautiful scene there. Temperatures over the weekend will be in the 50s for afternoon highs. But again, those overnight lows are sitting nicely and comfortably right around the freezing mark. So we won't see a huge rapid melt of snow with a big rush of water coming down the hill. But what kind of snow in sheer numbers have we seen? This is going to be our seasonal total. At Carson Pass, over 800 inches of snow. Sugar Bowl, 771 inches of snow. Mammoth and Kirkwood, 705. And Palisades Tahoe, you just saw that picture there, 700 inches of snow. Also, some big numbers for the Central Sierra Snow Lab. This is a place that we've been tracking throughout the season, getting awfully close to that 1952 number, but we're going to be just shy, especially since at this point we're just not going to see a whole lot of snow coming in. Instead, it's going to be more of a focus on the melting snow. But second snowiest on record since modern record keeping began, 728 inches. 0.94, I should say, inches this year for the UC Berkeley's Central Sierra Snow Lab. Now, numbers is one thing, but when we talk about the amount of water that's in that snowpack, that's where it starts to become extra critical, not only for refilling reservoirs, but also how much melt is going to result in the potential for flooding. So we'll take a look at the Central Sierra Snow Lab, and the current numbers you see right here in black is running well above what we've even seen in the past couple of years. And by the way, 2016, 2017 was a huge year. We dug completely out of drought for California, and we're even running above those numbers. That was kind of an anomaly year. We had huge evaporation rates, so we thought we were going to get this big inflow of water, and we did great. It's just that the evaporation, the amount of thirst in the atmosphere is growing. So it's really important that we take a look at the snow water equivalent of the snowpack in the Sierra. Even Virginia Lakes, which is going to be closer to around the central southern Sierra, that's about the only monitoring site that I was seeing that was running this high above with our current snow water equivalent, well above any recent year that we've seen. Again, despite the fact that maybe those years we had bigger drought reduction quicker in the season, it's just that the snow was just so high this year. So when we look at through the northern, central, and southern Sierra, we're still running about 200 to 300% of average, even this deep into the season. And when we look at that April 1st number, again, kind of that line of demarcation where we say, okay, at this point, we're not going to see so much in the way of accumulation. It's going to be melt. We're at about 200 to 300+% of average. All of this heading down the hill, filling our reservoirs, but also on the flip side of things creates the potential for a lot of downstream flooding. And you can see it here on some of the line graphs. We put this in a different way of depiction. Even in current years, even some of the biggest water years that we've seen, that being 1982-83, we're still running above that for the central and southern Sierra. Not as much so for the northern Sierra, but our reservoirs are in great shape. And this is why we've seen a huge change from the beginning of the water year last year, which begins, by the way, October 1st, the year prior, all the way through September 30th this year. We've seen a big reduction in drought, coming out of almost 100% of the state in drought at the beginning of the water year to roughly about 9% of the state in drought. Some of that is in the northern part of the state, right around Shasta, which is our biggest reservoir. So we're going to keep a close eye on that. But additional snowmelt coming into some of those reservoirs upstream there in extreme northern California will help to bring those numbers up. Our 30-year moving average for downtown Sacramento, just in numbers of precipitation, is 18.95 inches. And you can see 2016, 2017, I mentioned that just a moment ago, was a huge water year for us. We saw almost 34 inches of rain. Now, comparatively, we're at about 25.84 this year, 2018, 2019, pretty close to that. But it was the snowpack that just got everybody watching the numbers. The rain was great, but the snow was even better. But it was an epic water year nonetheless, because we're coming off of 3 critically dry years. Not only was it critically dry, it was critically warm. So the evaporative demand of the atmosphere, how much moisture was it basically sucking out of the ground, the fuels adding to that fuel load in the high country, and some really high fire danger. It was particularly high with this last drought. So water certainly helped. And with that 25.84 inches of rain, this is just dramatic. It is an inch ahead of the past 2 years combined. Exactly an inch, because the past 2 years combined was 24.84 inches of moisture coming in. And statewide, the numbers are equally as good. Don't want to discount the fact that everybody was seeing huge numbers this year, well above average except for Palm Springs. But again, most of the areas that have those biggest reservoirs finally digging out of years of dry conditions. When we put the reservoirs combined with the snowpack, that starts to give us a little better depiction of our portfolio of water throughout the state. And this is going to be our water stored in 28 Western Sierra reservoirs plus snowpack. I was just talking to Dr. Jeffrey Mount with the Public Policy Institute of California, and I say 28 reservoirs plus snowpack. However, did you know that we have almost 1,500 registered reservoirs throughout the state? So this is just a small slice of what we have throughout the state. And most of them look like this. The reservoirs plus snowpack are running well above average, just kind of narrowing it down here to the northern Sierra. That's well above average. Central Sierra also well above average. And you can see as we start to dig a little bit farther to the south how that orange line gets farther and farther from the average right here, indicated by the blue and the gray there. And for the southern Sierra, that's where we're doing great, but we have a big concern for the downstream tributaries and the reservoirs as well. Central and southern Sierra, what happens is they get very narrow. And so those channels that are going to take that water out towards sea or down towards the canals and even towards the aqueduct, we have to be careful that we don't have too much flooding downstream from that. And it's going to be a difficult job for water managers this year. So our water supply looking good. Right now, we're at 70 to 90% full for Shasta, Oroville, and Folsom. Again, these are slightly bigger areas with downstream rivers that are much more wide. They can handle a lot more water, and they tend to do a pretty good job with releases of managing the water. Once we dig into New Melones, Don Pedro, and San Luis, that's where things get a little bit more dicey. Currently at about 60 to 99% of average. San Luis looking good. This one is one that was particularly hard hit with the last drought, so that is in good shape right now. New Melones and Don Pedro, those are pretty interesting what's happening over there. 1 week ago, we were a little bit lower for many of our reservoirs. Shasta, Oroville, Folsom, New Melones, all coming up by about 1 to 4%, but Don Pedro is down 2%. So some folks are asking, wait, how can that even be possible? We have all this snow up in the high country, and now Don Pedro is lower? Well, there's a lot of releases happening because you just saw a moment ago how much we have in snowpack when we combine the reservoirs and the snowpack, and that has to go somewhere. So management is going to be very key for a place like Don Pedro. So it's starting to come up to right about capacity here. They start letting water out. So the inflow is roughly about 7,000 cubic feet per second. Outflow is closer to about 11,000 cubic feet per second. This all then heads downstream, and it is going to be affecting some of those downstream rivers. This is one of the areas, by the way, that is going to be in that more moderate risk of flood for the spring outlook, and that's pretty much what we're seeing. We've got 91 river monitoring sites that are at normal conditions, but 8 that are above, and most of that is going to be in the central and southern part of the Sacramento Valley. So above monitor is the San Joaquin, Tuolumne, and the Merced rivers. Again, that's just downstream from some of those reservoirs that I was pointing out a moment ago, and that's expected to stay that way for the next couple of months or so. Now, the highest river flows that we're seeing when we break it down into individual rivers, the Sacramento with the headwater being Shasta, that tends to have its highest flows. We just got this information from the Department of Water Resources. That highest flow was right around March, and the Feather River, which is going to be connected to Lake Oroville, that was in March. American River, that's Folsom, that is going to happen in May. But again, the reason why the San Joaquin, the Merced, the Tuolumne, the Mokelumne, even the Kings, when that doesn't see a peak flow until June, we're expecting some of the delayed onset flood impacts to happen a little bit later into the season, perhaps even into early summer, before we start to see some of those peak flows recede a bit. It also means being very careful by any of the waterways throughout California. They are going to be running high, fast, and cold for a couple more months. Now, at this point in the season, we start to see our precipitation drop off. That's why we were talking about that snow melt being the key factor instead of snowfall for the high country. And conversely, we start to see the temperatures go up. So again, that's why we start to see the snow melt and temperatures starting to warm. This is just for Sacramento. You can see those average highs, or average temperatures, I should say, starting to warm here as we dig deeper into our spring season and certainly into our summer as well, which will then draw out the next big question that people have been wondering about. What about our fire season? Well, we are looking at timing on the positive note here. A later onset of the peak season due to the near historic snowpack and also the rain. So we're seeing a lot of ground that is saturated and also some of the moisture helping to keep that fuel moist as well. But that brings me to my next point, the fuel. The amount of fuel is concerning right now and for future years because it's allowing some growth to happen. The moisture tends to do pretty well for a shorter period of time for some of those fine fuels. For the bigger fuels, they can hold on to moisture for quite a period of time and also help to promote growth in the coming years. So connectivity is a big one here. What I mean by that is you've got the bottom layer of the canopy for any kind of forest, any area that could burn, that being more the grasses, the chaparrals, things like that. But then when you talk about the connectivity of the laddering of fuels as we move up in profile vertically, say trees, even some bushes and then trees if you're going to go higher and higher. Well, that starts to become an issue because if you've got a lot of the fine fuels that have a lot of moisture content, they dry out quicker. They can be the promotion for a spark that starts to spread up into those bigger fuels, which would be the trees. So this has to be watched very closely for the vertical profile through the canopy in the forest. We're not going to get there quite yet, though. We've got a likely cooler and likely wetter scenario for the middle and end of April. And this all gets going, not through this weekend, but into next week when we start to see more of that connection out in the Pacific for some moisture moving on through. And you see it right here in the 10-day forecast. As we start to dig deeper into next week, we bring back some rain and some slightly cooler temperatures.